Hi guys, it's Miss Nielsen. I'm just going to take a few minutes to help you on your projects by giving you a quick rundown of some of the key events leading to the American Civil War. Just remember, any information that you use in your project from this video needs to be in your own words. Alright, let's go. In 1819, Alabama and Missouri applied to Congress for statehood as slave states. No one in Congress questioned and admitted Alabama as a slave state. Alabama was located far south of the Ohio River and was surrounded by other slave states. Congress had another reason for admitting Alabama with no debate. For years, there had been an unspoken agreement in Congress to keep the number of slave states and free states equal. The admission of Illinois as a free state in 1818 had upset this balance. By accepting Alabama with slavery, Congress was able to restore the balance between slave and free states. Missouri, however, was another matter. Some Northerners in Congress questioned whether Missouri should also be admitted as a slave state. Most of Missouri, they observed, lay north of the point where the Ohio River flows into the Mississippi. On the eastern side of the Mississippi, slavery was banned north of that point. Shouldn't the same ban also be applied west of the Mississippi? This question led to another one. If Missouri was allowed to enter the Union as a slave state, some asked, what would keep slavery from spreading across all of the Louisiana Territory? The vision of a block of new slave states stretching from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains was enough to give some Northerners nightmares. When the bill to make Missouri a state came before Congress, Representative James Talmadge of New York decided to keep that nightmare from coming true. Talmadge proposed an amendment to the statehood bill. The amendment said that Missouri could join the Union, but only as a free state. Southerners in Congress agreed that Talmadge's amendment was with a roar of protest. What right, they asked, did Congress have to decide whether a new state should be a slave or free? That decision, they said, belonged to the people of each state, not Congress. Southerners' protests were based on their fear that if Congress was allowed to end slavery in Missouri, it might try to end slavery elsewhere. The North already had more votes in the House of Representatives than in the South. Only in the Senate did the two sections have equal voting powers. As long as the number of free states and slave states remained equal, Southern senators could defeat any attempt to interfere with slavery. But if Missouri entered the Union as a free state, the South would lose its power to block anti-slavery bills in the Senate. If that happened, Southerners warned, it would be a disaster for the South. In the North, the Talmadge Amendment awakened strong feelings against slavery. Many towns sent petitions or formal written requests to Congress condemning slavery as an immoral and unconstitutional. The petitions called on Congress to stop the spread of this evil. Arguing in favor of the amendments, New Hampshire Representative Arthur Livermore spoke out for many Northerners when he said, an opportunity is now presented to prevent the growth of a sin which sits heavy on the soul of every one of us. But embracing this opportunity, we may retrieve the national character and in some degree our own. But if we suffer it to pass, let us at least be consistent and declare that our Constitution was made to impose slavery and not to establish liberty. The House voted to approve the Talmadge Amendment. In the Senate, however, Southerners were able to defeat it. The two houses were now deadlocked over the issue of slavery in Missouri. They would remain so as the 1819 session of Congress drew to a close. When Congress returned in Washington in 1820, it took up the question of the Missouri statehood once again. By then, the situation had changed, for Maine was now asking to enter the Union as a free state. For weeks, Congress struggled to find a way out of the deadlock over Missouri. As the debate dragged on and tempers were thin, Southerners began using such dreaded words as secession and civil war. If you persist, Thomas Cobb of Georgia warned supporters of the amendment, the Union will be dissolved. You have kindled a fire which only a sea of blood can extinguish. If disunion must take place, let it be so, thundered Talmadge in reply. If civil war must come, I can only say let it come. Rather than to break up the Union, Congress finally agreed to a compromise crafted by Representative Henry Clay of Kentucky. The compromise admitted Missouri to the Union as a slave state and Maine as a free state. In this way, it maintained the balance of power between the slave and free states. At the same time, Congress drew an imaginary line across the Louisiana Territory at a latitude of 3630. North of this line, slavery was to be banned forever except in Missouri. South of the line, slavehood was permitted. The Missouri Compromise kept the Union together, but it pleased no one. In the North, congressmen who voted to accept Missouri as a slave state were called traitors. In the South, slaveholders deeply resented the ban on slavery in part of the Louisiana Territory. Meanwhile, as Secretary of State John Quincy Adams recognized, the compromise had not settled the future of slavery in the United States as a whole. I have favored this Missouri Compromise, believing it to be all that could be effected under the present Constitution, and from extreme unwillingness to put the Union at hazard, wrote Adams in his diary. If the Union must be dissolved, slavery is precisely the question on which it ought to break. For the present, however, the contest is laid asleep. As John Quincy Adams predicted, the slavery issue was laid to rest, at least for the time. During the 1820s, most Americans paid little attention to the fate of slaves. But beneath the silence, a powerful force was building, a great revival of religious faith and fervor. This movement pushed the issue of slavery into the open again. The leaders of the Second Great Awakening promised that God would grant salvation to those who dedicated their lives into the Lord's work, and for some Americans, the Lord's work was the abolition of slavery. During the 1830s, abolitionists flooded the nation's capital with anti-slavery petitions. Congress, they were told, had no powers to interfere with slavery in the states. Then what about the District of Columbia, asked the abolitionists. Surely Congress had the power to ban slavery in the nation's capital. Rather than face the question, Congress voted in 1836 to table all anti-slavery petitions. To table means to set something aside indefinitely. This means that Congress would neither read nor act upon the petitions. Outraged abolitionists called this action the gag rule because it gagged all debate over slavery in Congress. Abolitionists, however, were far from silenced. They continued to attack slavery in books, newspapers, and at public meetings. While Southerners deeply resented the abolitionist attack as an assault on their way of life, the more abolitionists denounced slavery, the more fiercely slaveholders defended it. Resentment turned to fear in 1831 when Nat Turner and 6 fellow slaves launched a slave rebellion. Although the uprising was crushed, Southern states adopted strict new laws controlling the movement of slaves. Many slaves also tried keeping abolitionist writings from reaching slaves. Mississippi even offered a reward of $5,000 for the arrest and conviction of any person who shall utter, publish, or circulate abolitionist ideas. Nat Turner's rebellion was a large-scale slave revolt. Was the last large-scale slave revolt, but individual slaves continued to rebel by running away to freedom in the North. These fugitives from slavery were often helped in their escape by sympathetic people in the North. To slaveholders, these Northerners were no better than bank robbers. A good slave was a valuable piece of property. Every time a slave escaped, it was like seeing 5 acres of land vanish into thin air. Slaveholders demanded that Congress pass a fugitive slave law to help them recapture their property. The gag rule kept slavery issue out of Congress for 10 years. Then, in 1846, President James Polk sent a bill to Congress asking for funds for the war with Mexico. Pennsylvania Representative David Wilmot added an amendment to the bill known as the Wilmot Proviso. A proviso is a condition added to an agreement. Wilmot's proviso stated that neither slavery nor individual involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of the territory that might be acquired from Mexico. Southerners in Congress strongly opposed Wilmot's amendment. Congress had no right, they maintained, to decide whether slaveholders could take their property, where slaveholders could take their property. The Wilmot Proviso passed the House, but it was rejected in the Senate. For the next 3 years, Congress debated what to do about slavery in the territory gained from Mexico. Southerners wanted all of the Mexican cession open to slavery. Northerners wanted all of it closed. As a compromise, Southerners proposed a bill that would extend the Missouri Compromise line all the way to the Pacific. Slavery would be banned north of that line and allowed south of it. Northerners in Congress rejected this proposal. Then late in 1849, Congress applied for admission to the Union as a free state. Northerners in Congress welcomed California with open arms. Southerners, however, rejected California's request, making California a free state they warned would upset the equal balance between slave and free states. The result would be to make the slave states a fixed, dreary, hopeless minority. The year ended with Congress deadlocked over California's request for statehood. Once again, resentful Southerners spoke out of withdrawing from the Union, and once again, angry Northerners denounced slavery as a crime against humanity, a great evil. I'm going to stop here. There'll be another video coming, so go check that one out as well. It was a lot of information, so make sure that you go back and review and rewind. Nice job, guys.